Okay, let's get started. So, first of all, are there any questions? It's irrelevant. All right. So yes, you worked on your menus, you turned those in, and all that. I just kind of skimmed some things, looked real briefly, but I haven't looked in detail. And I do have a meeting with Srija after class today about stuff. So you should have the grades shortly for those. Today we're going to start talking about CSS. Okay, so. As I mentioned in the past, right? There is this trinity of the browser or the front-facing the front-side server technologies, right? We have HTML that is the structure. We have CSS, which gives us the presentation, and we have JavaScript, which gives us behavior. Now, the nice thing about these technologies is they are a very nice complement to one another in terms of helping you solidify your own knowledge. So if you're a little shaky at HTML, working with CSS is actually going to help you. Kind of get a firmer grasp of those things. So from that standpoint, it is actually fairly nice. All right, let's look at a couple of things. We'll create some stuff here. Let's see. So I think yeah, that's the folder. Great. Let's do a new file here and make sure that's saved. Yep. Okay, so we'll simply create a fairly standard HTML document, right? So call this hello CSS. So with CSS, there are a few moving parts. Basically, CSS comes down to being able to identify, or rather select, the particular elements that you're interested in, and then providing styling, that is, appearance for those particular elements. So we do need to talk about this idea of selection within CSS. Okay. So, as I said, there are really three ways that we can deal with CSS. Okay. The most, or let's say the least used, or what should be the least used, rather. Should be your inline styles. Okay, that is when you have a particular element and you need to provide a special case styling just for that one little thing. That's where you would use something like inline styling. Okay. So if I happened to if I wanted the case for style. Oops, nope. And we could do something like, I don't know, color purple. By the end, I promise this page will look absolutely hideous. All right. Okay. So there it is. There's our page. We have our purple text and so forth. Okay. Now, as I said, generally speaking, this type of styling should be used the least. Again, the idea is you really only want to use this when you have that sort of just little one-off exception case that you need to provide an override for. Okay. you can provide styling right within the individual document. Bless you. So, for instance, here I could say that, I don't know, the body is going to use, let's say font family. And in terms of font families, basically what you specify is typically a list, a sort of preferences list. Okay? So it might look something like the following. So I might have something like Arial, and then Helvetica, and then something like sans serif. Okay? The idea behind this is what we're basically saying is that our first choice or our first preference for a font to use is the Arial font. Now, if it's the case that the computer doesn't have the Arial font installed on it, then we're going to use Helvetica, or we'll try to use Helvetica. If it doesn't have that, you'll notice we have this last one sort of oddly listed, this sans serif. So the sans serif, there's a couple of other ones. There's serif, there's cursive, I think there's one more. Those are sort of your safe defaults. That is, the browser will pick its default sans serif font to use if it didn't have any of those of the fonts that we have listed. Okay. Incidentally, this is basically CSS2. Okay. Because the idea was in CSS3 what we got was the ability to provide fonts directly on the web. That is, we have a way of embedding fonts or having in our style sheet information for downloading a particular font. And so there we have less issues with having to worry about whether a particular font is in fact installed on a person's computer. Okay, and we'll see an example of that later on. But anyways, just kind of wanted to show an example of this. So let me go back over here, and you'll notice now I have this nice sans serif font listed in use for our document. Okay. Now a bunch of things happened here, right? So if we take a look, notice if I right-click on any element, and I've talked about this before, and this is going to become one of your best friends in this class. Basically, any of your browsers, you should have an inspect option, and that will give you something like this. Okay. As a front-end web developer, you're going to live in this view. Okay. So what we can see is, we see sort of this breakdown of what our document looks like, right? So we see we do have this H1. We see its style information and so forth. But then down here we actually see further information about what it is that we're looking at as well. Okay, so you'll see things like, for instance, notice we do see that it has the color purple. You can actually kind of turn these things off as well, like so, and you can actually edit them directly in there. They don't change the document, but they don't change that is the underlying HTML. But it is a quick way of when you're trying to see how changes are going to happen, you can kind of mess around with those things. Notice right here, inherited from. So the property of the font family is used. The property of text that's in the body. Okay. Is actually carried over to those elements that the body contains, right? Again, let's take a look at the structure of our document, right? So here's the body, right? And notice the body actually contains our H1 element, okay? So while we did not have a rule specifically for H1's font family, it inherits that from the body tag itself. Okay? This is basically a look at the cascading part of cascading style sheets. Okay? Now, some notes about that. Okay? The rules for cascading are incredibly complex. They make the US tax code look like child's play. Okay? So given that, I'm not going to expect that you know all the exact rules of how the cascade works and all of that. We are mere mortals after all, and we have tools that will help us do that. Like, for instance, just take a look at it in the browser to see what it actually looks like. And you'll notice that it will show you sort of where you're getting things from and all those kinds of things. Okay, so I'm not going to hold you responsible for memorizing all the arcane rules of how the cascade is actually going to be applied. But what you should know are these kinds of basics. That, for instance, if we provide styling for one element that contains other elements, that you will have this cascade or this inheritance type of effect. Okay. Questions about that much? Good so far? Okay, good. Now, a good computer scientist, as soon as they're presented with multiple ways of doing something, will always ask, well, how can I pit them against one another? So, for instance, what if I happen to have a rule about an H1? Now, we could do various kinds of rules for this. For instance, I could say, all right, it's going to have a background color of black. Let's start there. Okay. So notice I have two rules dealing with an H1. I have my H1 selector right here, and then on the H1 element itself, I have a style guideline basically saying that it has the text color purple. Okay. What's going to happen? Compiler error? No. Hell no, this is a browser, right? Do we get just purple? Do we get just black? Do we get a combination of these things? So right now I've got nothing. There we are. Right. Basically I get the combination. There was no conflict really here just yet. I had a rule for H1 talking about the background. I had another rule for H1 talking about the text color. That's fine. There's no real clash going on there. But what if we force a clash? Like so. So the H1 rule in the style section of our document says that the text color should be yellow. The style tag on our H1, inline into H1, says that the text color should be purple. And I'll hit F5 just to make sure, and notice. That is, so what's happening here is the most recent or the most local change wins. Okay. So having that inline style tag will override any of the other defaults that we might have gotten from elsewhere. Okay. That's kind of the point of the inline styles. That is, that you want to use those to override for a sort of particular exception to what it is that you are doing. Right? That's the basic idea behind that. Question so far?
Okay, question.
Yeah.
Is that the same case if we eliminate the inline statement and we just have the body and the header one?
Yeah, right. So for instance, right, so if I took this out, right, there's that. And then let's look here. Okay, so now we have this, right? So notice we have our yellow text and so forth. And again, we don't have a conflict here, because here we're saying we're going to use font family. Here I have nothing about those kinds of things, and so again, we're fine. Right? Now, can I put them in conflict with one another? Absolutely. Right? I could have something like, and again, the more recent one basically takes precedence. Okay. Also, the fact that the H1 is more specific than the more general body. Again, getting into those fun rules of the cascade. Okay. All right, let me go back to that. Other questions and so forth. Cool. So again, inline styles, those are for exceptional cases, right? And sometimes email. You can have styles within the page itself. It's fine if basically you really are only dealing with a single page, or if you have exceptions at the page level. Okay? But the preferred mechanism for using CSS is to have an external style sheet. That is, we have a separate sheet. Let me go ahead and create a new file, and let me go ahead and give it a name. Right. So notice it's in the. I'm putting it in the same folder with my HTML document. I don't have to. Just like with images, I can organize things in folders and so forth. It's not uncommon for people to create a style sheets folder and so forth. I'm just going to keep it in. I'm just going to keep it in the same one to make it a little easier. And of course, we'll name it .css. Okay. So CSS is not HTML. Okay. Going back to. Notice that all of this totally violates the rules of HTML, right? It looks nothing like HTML. There's no angled brackets in there and all of those kinds of things, right? CSS is not HTML. It's a separate language specification. Okay, so generally, we want to have external style sheets, right? And I think we talked about this or maybe 2 times ago, about a week ago, right? So why do we want external style sheets?
Keep it organized, and if you want to change the style of the entire website or page, whatever, you can just based off one thing.
Yes, because we're lazy, right? But lazy good. Remember, Larry Wall, the father of the programming language Perl, said that there were a handful of cardinal virtues of programmers, right? That is laziness, hubris, and impatience. Okay. Yeah, we're lazy. I mean, the point is that most of the time your website is going to consist of more than one page. And generally speaking, you want all of the pages on your website to have the same look and feel, right? It's a more cohesive experience, right? It's less jarring for the user, etc. Okay. So what we want is a single CSS file, but you might actually have a couple of them, right? But we keep those external from our HTML documents. That way, if we decide we need to make a change, all we have to change is that individual CSS file, and all of that is automatically propagated to the rest of our site. Okay? So generally, you want external CSS files. And those basically look like the following. So actually what I'm going to do, let me go ahead and I'm going to grab these. Just cut that out. And then we'll go over to here, and we'll paste those in. And let's see, some sort of nice little formatting thing, maybe. Maybe not. There. Yeah, unindent, right? Which is control and left square bracket. Okay. Some notes about how you write your CSS and so forth. You'll sometimes see the following style, something like this, where people kind of do them all on a single line. This is sometimes referred to as compact style. I tend to actually, as you saw, basically split these things out. I think it's a little easier to read and so forth. And you know, there's a couple of other different styles and so forth. You'll kind of adopt your own. Pretty much, again, CSS is fairly forgiving with regard to white space. However, the browser is not as tolerant about mistakes in CSS syntax as it is with HTML. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so let me go back over to, so we'll go over to index. Okay, so instead of using our internal style sheet, let's actually link to it. So it's just link. And basically then the name of the file, and of course then if we're in a folder, just like we would do with images, we would have the appropriate pathing and so forth. Okay, so let's make sure this is still working. Sorry? Style. Yes, you're right. Styles. Okay. So there it is, it's working, it's happy, it's good. All right, let's break it. So, let's see. The issues of syntax. So it's not uncommon to forget a semicolon. And generally speaking, the browser will tend to, when you have a CSS error, a syntax error, it just stops reading the CSS file there. Okay, so if I'm right, I shouldn't even see the black background and all that. Let's see. No, I was wrong. Let's see. Yeah, there it did, but I'm guessing, let's do, I don't know. Probably within the rule. Yeah. Okay. So notice within the particular rule, I left off a semicolon, and so at that point, basically, it just stopped reading the rest of the stuff for that particular rule. Okay. Put that back in, and the reason that I bring this up, of course, is as we are typing our own stuff and putting that in and all of that, it's not unlikely that you might forget to do such a thing. So, you know, when you're developing your pages and all, and you put in a rule and it's just not doing it, go back through and check for semicolons. Okay. All right. Questions, issues, etc. You can have, as I said, you can have multiple CSS files. So let's create that. And again, the question basically should come up, you know, What if they try to fight with one another? I don't know. Oh, that'll be nice and hideous. All right. Okay. So let's see, purple text, color white, let's see what's going on here. Right, so take a look, right? We get our purple text from there, our most local specification, right? Then we have other and style CSS. Right, again, so if we take a look, let's see, so style CSS says set the color of H1s to yellow with the background color of black, which clearly neither of those were honored. And other says set the color to white and the background color to aqua, right? We at least got the background color aqua, right? Why? The most recent change, right? So putting other here means that has the most recent change, and so we get a background color of aqua. On the other hand, if I swap these, you get that. And again, the inspector view shows you what's going on, right? So, for instance, notice we see actually here, the H1 rule that we got from Style CSS, it had a rule about setting the color to yellow. Notice that's crossed out because basically it's telling us that, yes, it's in fact been overwritten by basically what was happening there. And then furthermore, we got the one from other that, notice, we're not paying attention to at all. Again, you get a good sense of what's happening. All right. So that should give you, right, so that gives you kind of a good idea of how to control roughly the order of the application. Right. So not only in terms of when you include the individual files, but also the ordering of the rules in the individual files. Same type of idea. Okay. All right. Let's play around some more. Let me add some additional content just so we can kind of see. Let's do right. So so generally recall, if you have a H1 typically is there's only one on the page unless you have things like sections or articles. In that case, then you may have additional H1s, right? So. And let's do P and Lauren there. Yeah. So notice that has the aqua background. The text color itself is white, right? Why? Well, again, the color purple for the text color was only for that particular inlining. Otherwise, we default back to other and styles, whatever those happen to say. And of course, in other, we have color white and background color of aqua. So. Okay. So back to talking about selectors. Any tag itself can act as a selector. Okay, that is, you can specify to say, all right, for all H1s, do the following, right? So for every H1 that I have, we apply these particular rules. Sometimes it's the case, you might have things like this. So suppose that I say, oh, okay, you know what, actually we wanted the background color black for this as well, and maybe also a background color similarly. Bless you. Okay. So you'll notice that basically what I'm saying is that H1 through H3 should all have background colors of black. You could leave it this way, but generally speaking, what you'll usually see people do is something. In fact, actually, I'll combine sort of all of these. So, placing commas basically are like ands, right? Or actually, I guess ors, right? So for H1 or H2 or H3, the background color is always going to be black. That's basically what we're saying here. And then let's actually add some of those in so that we can see. All right, so we have that. I'll do an H2. So what happened? Where's level 2, level 3? Right. They're there, but the text color is default is black, and so black on black looks like it's been redacted. All right, so let's see if we can fix this. We could do something like... Let's see, do we have... Get this. You can have comments in CSS files. The comment syntax basically is the C style comment syntax. That is a / and a //. Okay, so here I've just commented those out, and then I could say, I don't know, color, well, why not? Antique white, sure. I feel fancy. All right. There it is. Questions? So. Yeah.
What would cause the CSS to work on like a local environment, like say we're doing this on a web browser on your computer, and then like for example, I had this happen like in the website or whatever, and I uploaded it to a server and it was like doing crap. It's not the CSS really working properly. I know it was something that I did wrong, but I didn't know exactly what it was. So I could like completely redo it.
I can some of the issues that I could imagine that happening, one, it could be a pathing issue, so that if you have them in a separate directory and you sort of misspecified the directory and then it's not, so you know, the sort of windows using the / separator versus / separator, that could cause some issues. Obviously, the other one is our slight browser version differences, and things like that, but I mean, without seeing it, it's...
Yeah, 'cause, I know what's the class, I made sure to check those permissions too, I know one time
Yeah, that's the other one where, right, if the permissions aren't right, it's not going to find it, and you're going to have issues. But it wasn't either of those.
No, and then it wasn't a problem for me either, because I have some things that are called normalized, and what it does is it
Yes.
normalizes every single
Right.
browser will be the same, so we just put out. I don't know what it was still, and it made me so mad this time, we gave it and I uploaded it.
Perhaps you need to find a different career. Sorry, HTML and CSS hate you, and you're cursed. And
Taught me how to upload it every so often, so you can see how it looks
yes,
on an actual website.
yeah, I have. That's strange. I haven't actually seen that. So, yes. All right. Other. So individual tags, basically we can use those to select particular content. I mentioned 2 classes ago about the difference between spans and divs. Okay, so the whole notion is that if it's the case that you just so in case you didn't see, so I am recording the lectures now, but I don't have a microphone, so I'm using my phone, which is recording and hooking up and all that. So then if I walk over there, which is what I prefer to do, oh, here, I'll do this. So divs and spans exist largely when you don't have tags to match whatever it is that you're trying to select. Okay, so if you don't have a tag already that's going to identify the particular content you want to grab, either for styling or later we'll see also for JavaScript, then basically you can pick either a div or a span. You just wrap it in a div or a span, and you can go, and typically then you will add a class or an ID to it, and then go on from there. Okay, so just so we can kind of look at some of these things. And I also kind of want to show, a few other things that we didn't quite talk about last time either. So last time we talked about this notion of of classes. So a class, right? Remember, basically for a class we can for instance add that to pretty much any element that we want. We can add a class, right? So I could say, this is going to use class warning. And so you can see I can actually add that directly on a particular tag. If I wanted something inside here to also be a warning, and I might even have something like, okay, so I have a strong element. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what was some crazy. Let's see. It's like wrap with. Where is it? Control-Shift-A. That's what it is. Right, so if I wanted this to be a warning, I could, first of all, I can wrap that in the strong tag. Now, remember, yes, okay. So, strong tag by default does that. It basically emboldens the particular text. So we could have something like that. Now, if I also wanted to say, oh, but you know what? That's also a warning. I could do that. Okay. So we say, all right. So notice I have an H2 that has been designated as a warning. I have a strong section that has been designated as a warning. And we can then style based on some of those things. So, for instance, I might have something like, okay, for the class warning, right? And then we can do things like say, oh, okay, so the color is going to be red. Right, and maybe we want to highlight this even further, so I'll do a background color of yellow. Yeah, it's going to be hideous. Okay. There. So anything that belongs to the class warning will be styled like so. Okay. Now, you can also combine your tag level selectors with classes. So for instance, I might want to say, well, you know what? For the H2 warnings, I don't actually want it to have the background color of yellow. Maybe I, what's that? Bisque, there you go. All right. Yeah. Okay. Terrible. See, it did that. It did. Okay, yes, it looks like okay. Not sure what caused that, but all right. Okay. Yes, so we can combine those. Let's talk about colors, by the way. Since so you'll notice I've been using various color names and so forth, and you've probably seen that there is these whole hosts of colors that I'm given as options sort of automatically by brackets to be able to use. However, more often than not, what you will actually see is another form of specifying colors. So, for instance, let's do, I don't know. That. All right. So, what is that? Most oddest hashtag? Now, how do you get blue out of that?
Google it.
Google it, yes. Exactly. Right, they are RGB values, but not in a sort of normal person's view of viewing numbers. Rather, they're using hexadecimal. Okay. So the first two numbers represent the red part of the of what we're specifying. Then we have the green part, followed by the blue part. Okay. And so basically what we're saying is we want no red, no green, and full on blue. Okay. FF in hexadecimal is what in decimal? 50? 15? The F by itself is 15. What's FF? 128, square root of -2.
3 eyes.
Right, let's see, there we are, programmer. Yeah, so hexadecimal, FF, right, and which is 255, right? Basically, we go from 0 to 255 for the 3 different color components. And so this is actually sort of one of the original ways of specifying colors. And so you see a lot of HTML and CSS in the wild that uses this, okay? So you should at least, you should start to get kind of a sense of how to use that. Yeah?
If you're doing like cross-platform, would it interpret the same as well?
It will, yes, yeah. It'll still. So whether this is on whether it's on a PC, a Mac, a mobile browser, etc., it's going to interpret that the same way. Yeah. Okay. So this is sort of the original specification. We do have, as you've seen, various named colors. Since really this is a shorthand for specifying RGB values, and I was going to say normal people, but then I was going to talk about artists, and artists aren't normal either. So we're not normal, and artists aren't normal. So, but yeah. So if you deal with art programs, typically you're specifying RGB, and usually you're specifying it in terms of 0 to 255, not hexadecimal. And so what we do have now is the ability to also specify using an RGB notation that that actually sort of seems normal. So for instance, I could have also written this as that. So we just specify those. Incidentally, you can also do percentages. I'm not sure why you want to do that, but you could. So you could actually have, we could specify this as that. Okay. And in this particular case, probably the best solution is that. But nevertheless, just to show you. Okay. Yes, it's still blue. So, so those are the various ways that you can specify different colors, and you'll see, yeah. Control E goes to the end.
No, you click on the hashtag.
Yeah.
And then Control G.
Ooh. Very cool. Yes. There you go. Okay. Incidentally, notice there's also you can specify them as HSLs. You know, again, if you're weird. So yeah. Okay. So a whole host of different ways of specifying colors depending on what your needs might be. All right. That's a lot of stuff on that. Okay, so let's look at a couple of other things. Let's talk briefly about tables again. So if I create, let me just create a small table here, and all right. Okay, so table row and table data, and let's do Yeah, that is what I wanted. Okay, 4 rows, 2 columns. And so I think this. Yeah, that'll work. So there's our table. And we talked about this, we started talking about this last time, about this idea of adding borders and so forth. So let's take a look at that, right? So for instance, I could say, all right, our tables that perhaps we want to specify some stuff about the border. So I could say something like gray and solid. Right. There it is. Right. So we have a border around the table proper. Okay. Now, similarly, we may want to have a border around the data, which gives us this ugly looking thing, right? So you notice we have sort of the border for the data, we have the border for the table, and we get this boxes and box kind of thing, which really just looks absolutely horrid. Okay. So one way that you can fix that, if you do want to have, if you actually want to have sort of borders all throughout, is to use this property. Setting border collapse to collapse. And so doing that, notice, gives you this. That is, those adjacent borders kind of collapse in so that we have our kind of more traditional, regular styled look to it. Okay. Now, let's talk about some other things with tables. If you deal with Excel, if you look at tabular data a lot, typically one of the things you'll see is that people will style alternating rows using different colors, right? So for instance, in this case, I might do something. One way of doing this would be something like the following. So I could have a class on this called alt, and a class on this one called alt, right? Notice, just creating that class doesn't do anything. Basically, we just create the class so that we can then say, oh, okay, for the class alt, what we'll want is a different background color, and I don't know. Oh, yes, that's why it's having issues. And that's okay when you have only a couple of rows. But it gets even worse when you then come back in, you go, you know what, I got to add some additional rows, and now all of a sudden I have to add rows in the middle or things like that, and things that were supposed to be alt weren't alt anymore, and that really sucks. So there's a better way of doing this. Okay. So the better way of doing this is to let CSS do the work for you. That is that we don't actually need this alt class at all. Instead, what we can do is use something called a PseudoSelector, P-S-E-U-D-O. So as a false selector. Okay, so the PseudoSelector that I'm talking about basically looks like, so let me get rid of that. And it looks something like the following. So I would have 4 TRs. In fact, I'll do it up here. Actually, let's do it this way. So I want certain TRs, certain rows to have this this background color. Now, which ones? Well, that's where we use the pseudo-selectors. So the pseudo-selectors typically are applied to some other selector, like for instance here where I've selected table rows, and we use colon. And so the pseudo-selector I'm going to use is nth child. Okay. And so I will say for the even children, we will make the background color light gray. And that gives me basically that, right? If you wanted to do it the other way, of course you can do it odds. However you need to do it. And again, you simply let CSS basically handle that stuff for you. A much, much nicer way of dealing with these things. Questions about that much? Let's talk about some further selector fun. So, we've seen classes, we've seen table, we've talked about at least one pseudo-selector. Let's talk about some other things. So for instance, nope, I don't want that. There we are. Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'm actually going to do it up here. And let's see, UL unordered plus, yeah, and okay, so then we'll say a, okay, so maybe we'll have something like, and thank you. Right. So we have our link to our links working. Okay, that's great. But suppose what we wanted to do is maybe we wanted to color links, say any links to USF pages differently. I'll put them in somewhere. I guess here. So, I'm going to look for A tags. And then I want A tags that have an href attribute that contains that. So notice the star equals basically is saying, so we're going to look for the href attribute. Star equals says we're looking within what the href points to find this particular information. And then I could say something like color dark green. And voila. So basically, any link on the page that we have that goes to usf.edu will be highlighted using that particular color. And incidentally, there are a number of these different attribute style selectors, right? So if you Google CSS selectors, you'll see there's a starts with, there's an ends with, and then there are these various other ones for different types of containment and so forth, and all of that. But basically, all of it kind of comes down to, again, using these square brackets. You can also use the square brackets just to ask for whether find all elements with a particular property in general, etc. Okay. So that's one example. Emmet. So, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was quickly creating this content, I was using some Emmet shortcuts for generating the content. Right, so for instance, when I wanted my multiple LIs, right, so I had syntax that looked kind of like this, right, and I can even then, I think I can do some stuff like, okay, and then I want to, so it turns out that this syntax here is taken from CSS. That syntax in CSS says that what we are looking for is an element that is the parent, and then you have the direct child being this. Okay. So just as in Emmet that I can create content that looks like that, I can do selections like that as well. So for instance, if I wanted to grab, let's say, the first paragraph directly after an H1 and style that differently, we could do that. Let's see. Shadow, emphasis, emphasis. Pardon? No. No, that's not what I want. That's it. There it is. Font style oblique is italics. And let's see, isn't this it? Bless you. Did I not save something? H1P, yes, yes. Bless you. Let's see. Beginning to think. Let's just try background color. H1 is the parent of P. Oh, yeah, you're right. Actually, H1 is not the parent of P. Damn it. Yeah. All right, let's do this. Let's do something like, yeah, that'll be better. So we don't have this right now. Oh, well, okay, so let me go back. So yes, H1 is not the parent of P because the H1 is not nested in, I'm sorry, the P is not nested in the H1 element. To do what it was that I was trying to do, you actually want plus. Okay, so plus is the direct sibling, and there it is. Okay, and similarly, right, so then we should be able to do font style yeah. Okay, so there's direct sibling. Let's show containment or parent and child. So parent and child, better example would be recall the Nav tag. Okay, so the Nav tag basically says this particular area is my site navigation. It's oftentimes that you will have things like links. So there we have that. Now let's go back. And this will select really? That section there. Okay. So notice, space is a descendant, but not a direct descendant of, not a parent-child, because the LIs are not actually direct direct children of that. What is the direct child of that? Well, again, so let's take a look. Right, so you see there's the nav, and the first thing underneath there is UL, right? So I could actually have applied it to that if I wanted to. So there's an example of a direct child. And that gives us that. Okay. So a couple of different examples of some of the different relationship selectors. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.